So, as I was looking through one of my older magazines the other week, I came across an interesting article. To sum it up super quickly, it was about a family of 8 who were entirely wiped out in the 1970s. Every single family member died, most of them in quick succession and in strange circumstances, other than one daughter who was adopted out at a young age. This is exactly the sort of content I like to cover, so I immediately jumped online to see if I could find more information. But here was where it got even more interesting. There was basically nothing online about this supposed incident. At best, all I could find was a single YouTube video and 1 or 2 old blogs that spoke about a book it had appeared in. So, what's the deal? An entire family of 8 who died in mysterious circumstances. You would think something like that would have everyone on the internet talking, right? Which of course leads to the obvious question. Did this event even actually happen? If nobody is talking about it, is that because there's nothing to talk about? Was the story simply made up? I decided to dig into it to see if I could figure it out, so let's start from the beginning. First things first, what supposedly happened to this family of 8 to begin with? As the story goes, it all began in 1959 in Kinosaki Town, Hyogo Prefecture. Kinosaki is a hot spring town with a long history, and these days you can find numerous museums there as well. But back in December of 1959, something rather strange happened. On the morning of the 19th, the 23-year-old daughter of the Wada family suddenly ran barefoot into the snow outside. She ran all the way to a nearby river, and witnesses reportedly heard her screaming, "Yappari iyada!" This can be a little difficult to translate without context, but basically she was upset with something. In English, it might be the rough equivalent of something like, "I can't do or take this anymore." And then she threw herself into the freezing river. Now, this young woman had just gotten married. So, with that in mind, it would seem likely that she was talking about her new marriage, right? That was also what people thought at the time. As it turned out, this young woman was actually the 4th-born daughter of the Wada family, but at the time of her death, she was also the eldest. The firstborn died of illness in 1944, when she was just 19. The second-born also died of illness in 1931, when she was just 2, and the third-born was adopted out of the family in 1939, when she was just 4. By this point, the Wada family had already been pretty damn unlucky. Now, because the 4th-born daughter was the eldest, and her younger brother was only 10 at the time, her new husband was adopted into the Wada family. The pressure was on both of them to succeed the family when her parents either retired or passed away. Many assumed that she didn't want this marriage, nor the pressure to succeed the family, and so she jumped into the freezing cold river instead. Of course, when her body was eventually discovered, she had frozen to death. And so, by this point, the Wada family had already lost 5 children. The first 2 daughters to illness, the first son to illness, and the third daughter was adopted by relatives and had no contact with her parents or other siblings. Then, the 4th daughter jumped into a river. Incredibly tragic and massively unfortunate, but not exactly urban legend or "that family is under a curse" worthy. Jumping ahead 16 years to 1975, and all that is about to change. The 5th daughter, now 35, was living in nearby Toyooka City. Here she worked as a hostess, and she was apparently one of the best. She was doing rather well for herself, but on May 9th, suddenly she told a colleague that her head hurt and she had to go to a psychiatric facility right away. This strange declaration came out of nowhere, and when she attempted to end her own life shortly thereafter, her wish was granted and she was taken to the hospital. There she seemed to be recovering quite well, but when a nurse suggested she go out onto the balcony to get some fresh air, she refused, fearing that if she did, she would jump. And indeed, shortly thereafter, the staff found her dead. She had taken her own life. Shortly before she died, she reportedly said, "My older sister is calling me. If I die, my father and mother will surely die too." And at the time, nobody was quite sure what she meant by that. According to her colleagues, the fifth-born daughter of the Wada family was beautiful, popular, well-off, and soon after she started, she immediately became the #1 hostess at her club. She also never showed any signs of being troubled or depressed. So this all seemed to come out of nowhere. Not to mention her bizarre statements about her headache and her sister calling to her. The police, however, determined that she must have been unable to get used to her new job, and was troubled because she wasn't yet married as a 35-year-old woman in 1970s Japan. Truly the worst crime to ever exist. Now, it seemed those final words of hers were prophetic, as 3 months later, on August 10th, her then 72-year-old mother went into the back fields with some oil and matches and lit herself on fire. Witnesses soon found her and she was immediately taken to the hospital, but 2 days later she passed away. Naturally, people assumed she was upset at not just the most recent loss of her daughter, but all of her children over the years. By this point, only her youngest son remained. Exactly 2 weeks later, on August 24th, the memorial service for the mother was to be held, but the 80-year-old father reportedly turned friends and family away, telling them to come back on the 26th. Then he and his son, then 25, left to go somewhere alone. The next day, one of the son's colleagues found them dead in their house. As with the rest of their family members, no notes were left behind, and with that, the entire Wada family were gone. With 8 members from the same family dead, rumours naturally began to spread as to why. Perhaps the family bloodline was cursed. Perhaps the house they lived in was cursed. Maybe their family land was actually built on a former cemetery, etc., etc. Or maybe it was nothing more than tragedy after tragedy, with each death sending the remaining family members further and further into a spiral of depression that made them want to join those who had gone before them. But regardless of the reasons, the entire Wada family were wiped out, with only the daughter who was adopted out surviving. No reason for this adoption was ever publicly stated, by the way, but presumably they had a good reason to do so at the time. Now, with all this information behind us, was any of this story even true? Where did it come from? Was it simply made up for old-fashioned clickbait to sell a few books and magazines? Thankfully, the magazine I have on hand does actually give a list of sources. They claim to have gotten their information from various magazines that were published in the 1970s and 80s. Specifically, the Yomiuri Weekly, July 9, 1975 edition, the Shukan Josei, September 23, 1975 edition, the Shufu Tosei Katsu, August 1980 edition, and a few more recent books, such as Toshidensetsu Tohanzai, which was published in 2009. Now, the article also published some pictures from the Shukan Josei issue in question, so even without it on hand personally, I think it's safe to assume that it does actually exist, and it's likely that this particular article from 1 month after the supposed events occurred is the original source of the story as we know it today. Pictures show what they claim is the Wada house, and the writer of the modern article also visited the location to take some up-to-date pictures. Naturally, the house has since been demolished and is now an empty lot, but you can apparently find a memorial stone nearby. With all this in mind, what are we to make of this story? I think it's unfair to dismiss it and claim it as fake simply because there isn't much on the internet about it. As I spoke about in a recent internet mystery video, sometimes crimes and incidents that happened many decades ago simply aren't known on the internet because they weren't widely reported on back in the day. The guy posting about the 2 women who died in Hiroshima several decades back was initially thought to be trolling because no one could find any information about it. But then, someone dug up some local papers from the time, and it turned out to be true. This could also be the case here. But at the same time, all sources for this tale of the Wada family seem to lead back to that one Shukan Josei article that was written over 50 years ago now. It's very possible that whoever wrote the article at the time did actually share a strange local story that just never gained more traction than that. But it's also possible they, to put it nicely, took some creative liberties when it came to crafting their article. Now, the 1980 edition of the Shufu Tosei Katsu magazine reportedly features an interview with a local elderly woman who appears to be the source of the Wada family home was built on a cemetery rumors. And if we take that at face value, it would suggest, at the very least, the Wada family were indeed a real family who did exist. Whether they were cursed or lived on a former graveyard is another story. But it's an entirely separate source that confirms they, at the very least, did once live there. However, that is if you believe her and the magazine, of course. That same publishing company also published Shukan Josei, so there may be a little bias involved here. Were the Wada family real? I want to give Shukan Josei the benefit of the doubt and think that, at the very least, the base information they were working with was indeed real. Even for cynical old me, it seems a little too much for them to entirely craft this story out of thin air. That being said, it's also very possible that some creative liberties were taken, particularly when it comes to the cursed and former cemetery angles. None of the deaths are actually that strange or outrageous. Every single one could realistically have happened, especially towards the end where each death seemed to trigger the next. These sorts of events aren't exactly uncommon. And as we saw with the Hiroshima story, just because something isn't well known on the internet, that doesn't mean it never happened. The further we go back, and the more rural we get, the harder it is to find information on cases like these. It seems likely that all of this did actually happen, but perhaps not exactly how it was told to us. But either way, it was an interesting case to dig into, and I think serves as a great example to always keep an open mind when it comes to stories like this, and always keep digging. You never know what's hiding out there. But what did you guys think of this one? Let me know in the comments below, and if you'd like to help support this channel so you can see more content like this, please consider hitting that join button down below as well. Every bit of support really helps. Thanks guys, and I'll see you again next time.